Welcome, and I should say welcome to Ben Lewin. Ben has welcomed us with his presence for the 2 days, and you'll see him a few times now. You'll see him today and also tomorrow. Just give you a brief background on Ben, and then I'll hand it over to him. Ben Lewin was born in Poland. He grew up in Australia with a childhood passion for photography and creative writing. After a brief career as a criminal lawyer, he studied at the British National Film School and worked for TV networks in England, France, Australia and the US, directing documentaries and drama. Ben wrote and directed the award-winning miniseries The De Niro Boys, which is one of my favourites. I think it's a terrific series, and was creator of the renowned TV series Rafferty Rules, for those who remember that one. Ben was also written and directed 3 previous feature films and won various awards. His most recent accomplishment is the award-winning film The Session, starring Oscar nominees John Hawkes and William H. Macy, and of course Oscar winner Helen Hunt. Ben is now in development on a number of film and TV projects. He's been living and working in California since 1994. His portfolio is diverse, including 1 wife and 3 children. Ben.
Fred Skepsey gets to talk about great art and hearing voices, and I get to talk about all the crap you have to do instead of making great art and hearing voices. I was not aware until I arrived here that my sponsor was the Australian Film, Television and Radio School, and I feel very touched by their support and honouring me. I don't know if there's anyone here who represents the school. But one way or another, I want to say how grateful I am to them for sponsoring me, and to the conference for including me. I feel very honoured, and it's really fun to be here and look at all that and suffer in silence, but someone's got to do it. There's not a great deal in what I have to say about what it's like living in LA or why we went to LA. I think that's the sort of thing you can get anecdotally from every second Australian filmmaker or artist who goes through that experience, and some get stuck there and some come back, and in many ways it's not a lot different to living in Melbourne, and life revolves around the kids and the dogs and the mortgage and all that sort of stuff. I'm going to try as much as possible to interpret the topic of the talk, the entrepreneurial director, but this is the first time I've ever theorised about such a subject. I got into the film business. I'm going to take off my watch so I can see where we're at, because I'd like to leave a generous chunk for question time, and I'd like you to start preparing your questions already, if you wouldn't mind. I got into the film business as a result of hanging about with the wrong sort of people, notably in my case Philip Adams and Barry Jones. As a result of my collision with these 2 characters, I left my law practice in Melbourne and went to film school in England. I must have been nuts. A lot of other people in film and television have similar stories. They left the coziness of a relatively normal and predictable life and walked into the casino of the entertainment business, where, like Las Vegas, most people lose their pants and their self-esteem. And here I am, like a casino card counter or other sort of professional gambler, trying to tell you how to beat the odds. And all I can say is that for sitting and listening to me, you're pretty nuts as well. But on the plus side, I've always felt very comfortable in the company of other lunatics, so here goes. I think I'll spare you, for the most part, the whole biography shtick, and jump straight to the gory bits. Up until about the turn of the new millennium, I had what you would call a career, and then it all stopped. I had a wife, 2 young kids, a dog, a cat, and a big mortgage. My career was in the toilet, and to add to the untenability of our situation, we went and had another child, which I suppose is the natural thing to do when you're broke. My wife, Judi Levine, who had once been an active producer, went back to the bottom of the food chain and worked in craft services, getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning to prepare breakfast for film crews and standing on a concrete floor all day. Meanwhile, I sold watches. Yeah, watches. Big, small, new, old. Not exactly, want to buy a watch, but pretty damn close. It was not the worst time of our lives, but I did consume a lot of comfort food and a lot of antidepressants. Sometime around 2005, Judi had the dogs inoculated. Pretty serious step. The dogs had also multiplied. And she and I decided we were ready to throw in the towel, come back to Australia and apologise for ever having left. But no one would listen to our apology. I banged on the doors of ABC Television and others who'd once been my employers and friends, but could not get anyone's attention. It was, at the time, the hardest pill to swallow, and I think I took it personally, which I should not have. In retrospect, I'm grateful for the rejection. It gave me the desperation I needed to move forward. Thus, the theme of this talk. Except for entrepreneurial, read desperate. And for the other part of the formula, add in sheer dumb luck. In a true spirit of desperation, I began sometime in 2006 to work on a television sitcom about myself. It was called The Gimp. It centred around the sort of character who traded the use of his handicap placard for sex. Sort of the way my marriage got going. And in the course of research, in the course of surfing the internet for tasteless material about disability and sex, including websites like Gimp Girls Gone Wild, I stumbled across an article called On Seeing a Sex Surrogate by a man called Mark O'Brien. For those of you who haven't seen the movie, it was the true story of a man in an iron lung who did not want to die a virgin and hired a professional sex surrogate to take him on his little journey to manhood. Apart from the emotional impact this article had on me as an ordinary person, as a filmmaker, it struck me as a project that was doable. I'm hoping that by the end of this talk, it'll become clear what that means. In terms of the crucial and decisive moments that led to wherever I am now, we can call that the first, a burning bush moment, a moment of bonding, like a relationship, like Roy Rogers and Trigger. Without that, there would be nothing to be entrepreneurial about. Making a film is typically described as a journey. Some take a decade or 2 or more. This one took a mere 5 years. The first leg was to obtain the rights to Mark O'Brien's story. We discovered, sadly, that Mark had died in 1999. However, we also discovered that he had a girlfriend in the years before his death, to whom he'd left his literary estate, a lady called Susan Fernbach, whom we tracked down to a small town in Northern California called Fort Bragg, and who not only gave us a free option, but became an essential character in the story and gave the film a beautiful, ironic ending. This was a man who had hired a professional because he believed he would never find the real thing, and ironically, he found the real thing, which was not actually in his original article, but was the ending of our movie. Susan also connected us with Cheryl Cohen Green, the real-life sex surrogate in Mark's story. And this led to another one of those crucial how lucky can you get moments. Cheryl lived in San Francisco, or Berkeley to be exact, where the film is actually set. When I arranged to meet her, there was a friend of mine from Melbourne holidaying in San Francisco with his family, an old law school buddy. I suggested to him that he come with me, just for interest's sake. As I talked to Cheryl, one thing that went through my mind was, what's the difference between this woman and a hooker? I'm sure the same thing was going through my friend's mind. At a certain point, I asked her about some details to do with her sessions with Mark. She didn't remember exactly and asked if I minded if she went and got her notes. Of course I didn't mind. She left the room. My friend and I looked at each other. Notes? She came back and read from her notes. They were the sort of clinical observations a professional therapist would make. And I used a lot of them pretty much verbatim in the movie. No, I thought, hookers don't keep notes. She was an absolutely fascinating woman, and I realised that my film was no longer going to be a biopic, but a relationship movie. My friend later asked me, what did I think it would cost? And the first figure that came in my head was $1 million. An easy number to remember. He shocked me by offering to put up the first 20%, then and there. It's the first time anyone has ever stepped up unsolicited and offered to help me finance a film. And there wasn't even a script. It was a very, very motivating moment indeed, because my friend was not an art house lover. He was a mainstream moviegoer, and somehow this story had captured his imagination, and I felt that he, in many senses, was the audience and not just a mate. The next 18 months or so was the boring bit. I wrote the script. I haven't got anything much to say about it, because if there is a science to script writing, I've never discovered it. You just keep doing it until you think it's done, and don't show anyone your first draft. Maybe your mum or your wife, but that's it. Okay, putting the movie together. What comes first? Attaching the talent or raising the money? Any thoughts? Attaching the talent? Hands up. Raising the money? Well, most of you think it's attaching the talent. Okay, this is how it actually went down. We started by sending the script to the usual suspects, production companies and distributors. Some of them are even known for their daring subject matter in the US, England, France, Australia. Mercifully, I've forgotten who most of them were. It was like pissing into the wind, or in the Australian vernacular, pushing shit uphill with your nose. I realised pretty soon that I would have 1 foot at least in the grave before anyone even opened the first page. Attaching actors, or trying to, was equally an exercise in futility. They didn't know me, I didn't know them, and it was close on 15 years since my last feature film had been released. I went back to my law school friend and showed him the script. And in spite of the fact that the global economic meltdown had hit him pretty hard, he was still as good as his word and promised to put up 200 grand, which later increased to 250 grand. He also gave me some valuable advice. He said, when you go around pitching the project, don't try and appeal to people's good nature. Just appeal to their greed. Then tell them that they're going to feel good about it as well. So I concocted this theory, which I began to believe myself, that the films that had the best track record of profitability were those made for between $100 and $200 million, and those made for between $1 and $2 million. Sounds good, doesn't it? To this day, I don't know if it actually has any validity, but the spiel was as good as any. I asked my brother, who was a real estate agent in Melbourne, if he knew some rich people, and he gave me a list of 20 names and phone numbers. That was another threshold event. I stared at that piece of paper for a whole day. I had never cold called anyone in my life to ask for money. And it was incredibly difficult to pick up the phone and make that first call. I did. After 20 calls, one person ponied up 50 grand. So a pattern had been set. Another piece of friendly advice I was given was, I think it was actually the same guy. When you're asking people to invest, make it clear to them that the first thing you're going to do with their money is not put it in your own pocket. Typically, of course, that's exactly what a filmmaker would do. After all, you have to have money to live. If you can't live, you can't make a movie. However, it didn't take long to realise that in the time it would take us to raise the money to pay for the script, the director, and the producers, what we affectionately call above the lines, we could actually make the movie in that time. The conclusion was very simple. The above the line costs of this movie would be zero. And by zero, I mean zero. What about actors? Would you believe that when we were raising the money, the subject never came up? The investors we were targeting had never invested in a film before. They were naive enough to believe that the fundamental basis of a film and of their investment was, wait for it, the script. From an industry point of view, this was sheer heresy. Given that we had eliminated some hefty numbers from what we called the budget, we decided to press the go button at 650,000. At around that time, working very much in our favour was the fact that for the first time in living memory, the Australian dollar was worth more than the US dollar. It had 35 to 40% more buying power in America than it had 10 or 12 years earlier. A side note, which I'm sure will fascinate you all. What about Screen Australia? What about all that lovely government money? Well, don't think we didn't go down that road. We had an Australian writer, director, producer, DP, production designer, and costume designer. We could also have had editor, composer, and so on. In the end, also 80% of the money was Australian. The thing was, we were kicking off with private money. And we felt we had a responsibility to use that private money as efficiently and effectively as possible. And that was not necessarily going to be achieved by going into partnership with the government. Anyway, we asked them for $250,000 to be invested basically on the same terms as our private investors. Were we out of our cotton-picking minds or what? However, I really don't wish to criticise. Screen Australia already seems to me like an organisation under constant siege. And ultimately, it was for the best. It really, really was. But I think there is room to reflect that the guidelines which seem to define Screen Australia's investments might be out of touch with the modern realities of low-budget independent filmmaking. We could have transposed the story into an Australian setting with Australian characters and spent every production dollar in Australia, but we chose not to. Why? Because, one, it would have cost at least 2 or maybe 3 times as much or more. And at the same time, we felt we would be reducing the commercial value of the film because we could no longer say it was a true story about actual real people with real names, which ultimately turned out to be of great promotional value. So there we were in Los Angeles with 650 grand in the bank. And this is what we discovered. If you can get into bed with a good casting director, and if you can say to prospective actors, look, I'm not asking you to help raise the finance, I'm asking you to be in the movie, which I'm making with or without you, then something interesting might happen. Which it did. Our casting director, Ronnie Yeskel, who had, for example, cast very interesting movies like Pulp Fiction, got us John Hawkes. I must, on a side note, say that her personal devotion to the project was unexpected and critical. And without that, I don't think I would ever have gotten to this remarkable actor. Now, in spite of the fact that he is one of the most gifted actors in Hollywood and had just received an Oscar nomination for Winter's Bone, his name would have not raised the slightest flutter of interest amongst any distributors or foreign sales agents that I'm aware of. But it didn't matter 2 hoots. John Hawkes is the actor's actor. When he came on board, it was published in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter and some of the other major trade press. In the eyes of the industry, tiny as it was, our film had legitimacy. Casting the leading lady was a whole new story. Not only Helen Hunt, but several other top-draw actresses really wanted to play the role of Cheryl Cohen Green. I chose Helen, amongst other reasons, because she's brought some wonderfully unexpected qualities to the role. Nothing excites a director more than an actor who expands the part beyond his or her original vision. Her agent at CAA, Peter Levine, was totally in love with the project. it amazed me that Hollywood agents would do anything for any reason other than money, but there you go. And also brought us William H. Macy. After that, we could have anyone we liked for the other supporting roles. Moon Bloodgood, Adam Arkin, Rhea Perlman. God knows, I never expected it. I want to show you in a moment a clip from the movie, not just to break the monotony, but because it actually has some bearing on the money-raising process. It's a sad bit. I could have chosen a funny bit. And there's a moment in it when someone hands Helen an envelope, and if you know the rest of the film, you know that the envelope has got the cash in it that he pays for every session. Anyway, Bevis, you want to run the clip? Thank you. The reason I chose that clip is this. We did all the intimate scenes between John and Helen in story order, which was very important. Before Helen was about to come into the shoot, she got sick, and we found ourselves on a few days of hiatus, which was very costly to us. And you can't help it. And in that time, our biggest investor, who was a friend of mine to whom I'd sold a lot of watches, was passing through LA from New York on his way back to Australia, and was coming to visit us to see what we were doing. And it was essential that we put on some dog and pony show. And I begged Helen to get out of her sick bed. I said, not going to be anything heavy. It's just going to be the exterior motel stuff. You know, nothing between you and John. That exterior motel stuff, of course, involved probably her most emotionally intense scene, which was the end of her character arc, which was she was being asked to do on her first day of shooting. And there was not a single murmur of protest or discussion about it. She just did it. I think we did 8 takes. By take 6, I knew we had it. And my investor and his wife sat there like stunned mullets, watching what this extraordinary actress could do. Anyway, when he got back to Australia, he sent me another 100 grand. So that's why I showed you that clip. The other thing, and this is, my little moment talking about art, if you like, was that the following day after we shot that scene, Moon Bloodgood, who plays the carer, the Asian carer, came to me and told me that on the reverse shot, when I couldn't really see, we were on her and over Helen's back, Helen Hunt was giving as much as she was on her own close-up, which is an exceptional thing for an actor to do, and certainly for a movie star, many of whom don't even want to be there for their reverse. So, again, that's one of the reasons I showed you that particular clip. I have to tell you, by the way, that the entire cast budget of the movie, I think including extras, was $52,000. Everyone worked for modified, low-budget scale, which I think is about $800 or $900 a week. To watch some of the top actors in the business working not for money, but for the sheer love of the craft and of the material was a truly beautiful thing. Another thing I have to tell you is that the original 650 grand didn't quite do it. Judi and I mostly her, was still raising money while we were shooting and during post-production. Often she'd be calling people not to ask them to invest, but to tell them, you're in for $5,000, you're in for $10,000, and so on. When all's said and done, we made the film for $935,000 and some change. Then we raised another $50,000 to take it to Sundance. Seems a lot, doesn't it? I asked our attorney, Craig Emanuel, a fellow Aussie working in Hollywood, and a man who, at the very minimum, deserves a Nobel Prize for his services to Australian creative talent in America. I said, couldn't I just go to Sundance with a backpack and a DVD? He said, yeah, but you'll end up leaving money on the table. So we paid a top publicist $10,000 when we could have had a lesser one for free. We paid for the 3 principal cast to come to the festival in grand style with hairdressers, groomers, limos and chauffeurs up to the wazoo, plus our own costs. Interestingly enough, by way of background, we had Sundance selectors visiting us on set while we were shooting. By the time we got to the festival, there was already quite a buzz. The movie was shown at the Eccles Theatre, the biggest venue in Park City, at 12:15 on Monday, just after the chaos of the first weekend, but while all the major people were still in town. Before the day was out, we'd sold it to Fox Searchlight for $6 million. I can't begin to tell you what that was like. We also won the Audience Award and a Jury Award for Ensemble Cast. The other big winner at Sundance at that time was a film called Beasts of the Southern Wild. Any of you see that? Okay. Which won the Grand Jury Prize and was also picked up by Fox Searchlight. Not, however, for the same phenomenal sum. It was made for about 1.8 million. Unbelievable when you look at the production values of that movie and the physical challenges that they had to deal with. Other films at Sundance were made for a lot less. One director told me it cost him more to bring his film to the festival than it did to make it. And this is how it is in the States, particularly now in the digital age. You have a growing culture of micro-budget movies where talented people are prepared to work for nothing and can produce entertaining and sometimes riveting product for next to nothing. It's difficult to transfer this culture to an Australian setting with its long-standing belief in the dignity and value of labour, where a fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay, a tradition which agencies like Screen Australia are also committed. Compare this to America's tradition of slavery and the current ethos that if you really want to work for nothing, no one is going to stop you. It's hard to know whether this is also the way of the future in a business, if you can call it that, where there is such a huge oversupply of players and of product. Okay, back at the story of the sessions. The good news was that as a result of the Fox Searchlight sale, and they did pay up, some of them don't. The investors all doubled their money, and the creative talent, including myself and Judi, got paid. I became known as the 40-year overnight success. And we spent the rest of the year travelling and doing the festivals, which was a lot of fun. What was not fun was awards season. It's brutal and political, and every morning I would wake up and have a Xanax for breakfast. it ultimately, I'll cut this a little short. If you want to know more about it, you can ask me in question time. It ultimately boils down to who are the best street fighters and who can outspend who. In the end, I'm immensely grateful for what we got. Certain number of awards, Golden Globe nominations and an Oscar nomination, but I was so glad when it was all over. So where are we now? At the moment, I may be a bit harsh on myself because I feel I may have made some idiotic decisions and failed to make some clever ones. I turned down a Disney movie about baseball because I thought it was dumb. Of all the scripts I've been sent, it's the only one so far that has actually got made without me. I failed to observe the time-honoured rule to have your next project ready and moving before your current project even comes out. I wanted to be a director for hire and walk into someone else's ready-made project. As a result, I've now bought into the most ridiculous and inefficient system in the world. Who knows? There could be a job waiting for me when I get back. There might not. Recently, however, I did pull my finger out and started writing a new script, a low-budget one which we're going to do all by ourselves, the way we did the sessions. In many ways, we could be back where we started, and I don't mind at all. I made the sessions mainly to recover my self-esteem and to give my kids a sense of who I was. Like Fred Skepsey, I believe in great art, but I'm not totally committed to it. I also have a great love of the craft side of the game, and some of my happiest times have been directing meaningless episodic television. If you're confused by all of this, don't blame me. I now await your questions. If any of you have any questions about watches, I can deal with that too. The question was, with the reduced budget, did I find it difficult to get everything done in time? And yeah. By the time we finished shooting, we ran out of money and we had to raise money for post-production. So we were raising money every step of the way. Now, I wouldn't describe this as difficult because, you know, once you got going, there was a tremendous spirit there, and all of us were convinced that we would actually finish the movie. I would not so much describe it as difficult, but use that lovely word, challenging.
So I'm sorry I missed the first part of the session. But I just came for the second part. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. And my question is, with people like Helen Hunt, who was in the film, was she aware of the fact that you were on a shoestring budget and that you were still raising money as you were making the film? That there was a chance that perhaps the film wasn't going to be finished because there was no money, or there was no such...
Helen is herself an independent filmmaker, and she knows the score. It was never a subject of discussion because we always behaved professionally, and whatever the circumstances were, she went along with the plan. So there were never any issues between myself and the cast about our ability to finish it. I mean, there was a... I must tell you that the real hero of the thing was Jeffrey Simpson, the director of photography. He had a relationship with Helen of immense trust, which was just by force of his personality, the person he was. Without that, I do not think I would have achieved quite the same degree of generosity from her. But were you here for Fred's talk this morning? I don't work like Fred. I was kind of curious to hear what he said. I mean, you know, I stay with the monitor. I don't put myself in the faces of the actors. It all happens before. And the dynamic on the set is between the actors, each other, and the DP, if anyone. But I like to disappear when they're actually doing their thing. That's one of the beautiful things about working below the radar. You can do whatever you like, and I think we had the confidence to say, just do it. I mean, the most interesting scene, if you like, was in that respect was where she first had to undress him. I had no idea how she was going to do it, and just watching that scene evolve, I felt I was making a documentary.
Boring budget question. You said you had 50 grand on talent, so where did the other 850 grand go?
Well, mostly on the cost of the crew. I mean, we shot for 22 days. My line producer got a bit carried away with the trucks. You know, he liked to look down the street and see a street full of trucks. And indeed, when we went over what we'd spent too much. I mean, I said to him one day, look, we've only got John Hawkes today and he doesn't use any makeup. Why have we got 3 makeup artists on the set? He didn't really know. But you can ask anyone in production to explain how you can spend 850 grand just on the daily grind of getting everyone there, feeding them. Art department is a big expense. I would say probably that was the biggest single element, because it was a period film. I mean, you don't really notice it, but all the cars had to be from the 1980s. All the stuff had to be specially, couldn't just go into a motel and say, this is right. It all had to be converted to a period situation. Yes, 935. We had to stay under a certain ceiling in order to qualify for the SAG modifications. So the ceiling actually is more or less like 650, but if you employ what they call diversity, in other words, different ethnicities, people with disabilities, women, etc., you earn extra points. And the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild really don't mind if you pay the writer and director nothing. Yes?
You said that the cast were working for scale. Were you able to get the crew to work for reduced rates as well?
Yes. I had 5,000 in the budget for Jeffrey Simpson, and he gave it back. Said put it back into the budget. The editor worked for her upfront money was 5 grand. I think, I felt guilty about it, so I gave her 10. I would say that the only people who were paid well were the truck drivers.
If there was no rehearsal, did you talk to the cast much about character beforehand?
Yes, much.
Can you tell us about that process?
I did, particularly John and Helen, and particularly Helen, because my God, to do all that nudity that she did, very gutsy thing to do, and there was a lot of reassurance needed and a lot of explaining why, and just the sense of being there. But once she got it, and I suppose that the 3 of us, me and John and Helen, I think spent only 2 one-hour sessions at my house talking through the scenes, really just to modify the lines, but not to... I didn't have any deep discussions about finding the character. John Hawkes had the use of a documentary film about Mark O'Brien, which he, studied to the last frame. And people who knew Mark O'Brien were totally spooked out by how authentically he had reproduced that character. But I don't really believe in messing with the actors too much. I mean, really the crucial moment between actor and director is when you decide to cast them. That's just my view on it. I mean, these pictures that I see of directors like Roman Polanski doing this or that to the actor, to me that's nonsense. Sorry, I usually get worked up about that stuff.
Did you, after you got the Fox Searchlight money, did you distribute it amongst the actors, for example, that hadn't been paid much, or did you put that into your next film, or did they give it all at once? How did you kind of manage
Sorry,
that?
how was the Fox Searchlight money paid out, and what did we do with it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's paid out in 3 chunks. They put down, I think, I don't know whether it was 10% or 20% on chain of title. Then there's basic delivery, in which you get most of the rest, and then final delivery, in which you get the last 10%. The payments to the actors, and indeed everyone else, were based on the contracts that we had with them. And these were negotiated by very experienced agents and attorneys. And I would say that, the basic deal was this. The investors got their principal back plus 20% premium, plus 50% of the net profit was the investor's share of profit. The other 50% was to be split up amongst the creatives, if you like. Me, the other producers, and the actors. And the way it kind of more or less worked out was that John and Helen and me and Judi got about equal shares of the pie. But all that was really just as per contract. I have a word to say about lawyers. The $6 million contract with Fox Searchlight was 3 pages long. Just bear that in mind, that you can have the biggest contract you want reduced to a short number of words. And I've met as many lawyers who are deal breakers as they are deal makers, and beware of them. What? Sounds... Yes, a deal, but we never proceeded to a long form. The deal with Fox Searchlight never went beyond the short form memo. Wasn't necessary.
In terms of the environment in Australia for filmmaking, are there any do you have a vision for how filmmakers like yourself can work outside the system without public money, as entrepreneurial as you've been?
Look, I don't know. Really, I don't think anything of what I've said has much instructional value at all. It's really anecdotal. For me to go and say to you, look, forget about distributors, forget about actors, just do it my way, go to a bunch of private people, get the money, make your film, sell it at Sundance for $6 million. Not that easy. It really is more in the nature of a lottery than a, predictable series of events. However, I really think that you have a better chance if you certainly in that attempt to put the money together based on the script. And I think, Fred Skepsey emphasised it enough. That's the most important element of all. And if you can really knock people's socks off with that, then the rest might fall into place. I think that, this whole shtick when you go to a distributor and say, well, who's attached? And you say, well, Brad Pitt's attached. Well, what's it about? It's about a piece of dog shit in the road. Does he play the dog or the piece of shit? Well, it doesn't really matter. And this whole notion of, having attachments in order to impel it, I think is the real killer. And people groping for some kind of insurance policy because the last thing they want to exercise is their own fucking judgment skills. Because, ultimately, that's what can cost you your job. So, the whole thing is a process of trying to push off that moment when you have to make a judgment call and bear the responsibility for it.
Oh, Ben, thank you. That was a very illuminating talk. You're just talking about there's a lot of people who would have a couple of $100,000, a terrific script, but they wouldn't get past that to go on to make a substantial film like that. Was there any particular magic potion or any particular moment or incident that happened that allowed you to make that jump to making the film?
Allowed me to make the jump to...
Well, yes, of not just having the money, so you had a couple of $100,000, you had an excellent script, but not a lot of films have those, or projects have those two things, but they don't go on to making a film.
I think the link is the casting director, or that's one of them, because the casting director is your interface with the actors. If you don't know them already, and you can find someone who's really fired up about it. First thing our casting director asked me was, have you got the money and have you got a start date? Otherwise, I'm not interested. And I think that, you know, it's that sort of blind leap to kind of sidestep all the other elements and treat it as a kind of a cottage industry. I mean, my editor had just come off a movie made by, I've forgotten the name of the director, but he's a mainstream director. And it was a movie he made called Girl Walks Into a Bar. And it was released on the internet. And it had Danny DeVito, Carla Gugino, Zachary Quinto. Really, you know, proper pucker Hollywood actors. And the whole movie was made for $100,000. Everyone got $100. That was everyone's fee. And she arrived one day and she said, I've got the first back-end check in my life. They put it out on the internet. It was basically sponsored, well, not sponsored, they made a deal with Lexus. And who paid so much per hit. And there were little... every 20 minutes there was kind of a quite inoffensive Lexus commercial. The fact that the movie was kind of episodic in nature helped it. And on the first day it was released, it got something like 250,000 hits. Okay, you can't guarantee that kind of result, but it was a new and unusual way of spending $100,000. Does that sort of address your question? I mean, it helped in that case because the director was the female star's boyfriend and knew a lot of actors, and it's not as if you can, you know, necessarily pull that together without knowing those people. But it's just an example of how little money you can do stuff for.
Just like, again, put your hands together for Ben. Thank you. Thank you.